Daniverse. Created in 1931 by cartoonist Chester Gould, originally envisioned as Plainclothes Tracy, and based in part off Eliot Ness, the famous government agent, Dick Tracy in a way is like one of the forefathers of both the crime procedural and the modern American superhero. He fights crime, he has trademark clothes and gadgets, and he has a very specific code of justice. Above all else though, he's a very 1930s sort of creation. The law enforcement type who 100% unironically plays by the books, but is more than willing to take matters into his own hands when necessary. Dick Tracy turned out to be a heavily influential property, notably his colorful recurring gauntlet of regular gun-tooting crook villains who just happen to look like freaks, were a huge inspiration for how Batman would handle his villains. However, Tracy took a lot of influence from Batman as well, in sometimes very obvious ways. While Gould never kept the villains around that much, usually offing them off after their initial appearances, their distinct looks led them becoming iconic parts of the Tracy lore. It's hard to see anything Dick Tracy related that doesn't at least have some of the circus freak style gangster antagonists in it. Dick Tracy was so big and popular at one point, he even had a sick sweet surf guitar style song based on him. Dick Tracy! He's got a bulldog jaw. But before we get started buckling up and talking about detectives, please remember to hit that subscribe button down below, and also share this video with anyone you know. I'll be a literal mumbler if you don't. With his recognizable yellow coat and jacket, Dick Tracy was an instant hit, and he's been adapted several times in media, from serials and feature films to animated series. But within the past 30 years, things have been relatively quiet on the Tracy front. But this strikes me as odd, because you'd think somewhere a studio executive is out there wanting to make this property into a modern gritty reboot, akin to say the success of those recent Jack Ryan and Reacher TV shows. Sure, it's a very old-fashioned 1930s style of a police detective, but that doesn't stop studios from reviving every noteworthy radio-era hero under the sun. However, there's one glaring problem, one giant elephant in the room that stops all of this in its tracks. The thing to note about the media rights to the character of Dick Tracy is that it's all owned and comes back to one person by the name of Mr. Henry Warren Beatty. For those who haven't been in the know, just about everybody within a mile radius of being a millennial and Gen Zer, Warren Beatty was once one of the biggest actors of the 1960s and 1970s. As his career progressed, he became more and more known for his egotistical behavior and picky nature. Wanting to be involved in every known production of the movies he has starred in since the dawn of time, Beatty has an especially huge fascination and holds on to the property of Dick Tracy like a puppy clinging to a chew toy. If you want to know how much Beatty is protective of the Tracy rights, he actually got a proposed modern updating of the character back in 2005 cancelled. Under Beatty, the character has basically been turned into Purgatory Tracy. I wonder how he'll fight tooth and nail though, when the property officially enters the public domain in 2026. Now that's a job for a detective. But first, let's talk about the Dick Tracy movie itself. I'll admit, I have a love-hate relationship with it. Hate, because while I mostly enjoy it, there's a frustrating element there regarding the story, which I think could have been better if it didn't focus on a pretty mediocre and one-sided love triangle. That being said, in a film world continuously dominated more and more by franchises, movies like Dick Tracy stand out as rare beasts. Things that are not likely to be seen ever again from a major studio. Something so colorful and yet so clearly the passion of primarily one person. I don't think the film world would be better off if movies like Dick Tracy didn't exist at all. If anything, I would argue it would be worse. If there's anything you can compliment Dick Tracy and Warren Beatty in general for, it's that he doesn't go cheap. He throws out all the stops. Hiring Vittorio Storaro to do cinematography, Richard Silver provides some incredible art direction that does its best to recreate the look of a comic strip. Legendary Stephen Sondheim writes some incredibly killer numbers, and Danny Elfman, hot off Batman, is asked to provide a very similar sounding score to that one, just with a lot more jazz infusion. Plus, because it's Warren Beatty, everyone who's everyone is in the film. Even the most arbitrary of parts are played by big recognizable names in the industry. See, being one of the most powerful men in Hollywood does indeed have its positive quirks. Despite the fact that it did make some money, after its strong opening weekend, the movie tapered off rather fast, and the Mouse House, which was producing it, and was expecting a Batman level of major success, declared it a failure. They even went as far as to scrap an attraction they were planning at Walt Disney World. However, even with that minor setback, that doesn't stop Beatty at all. The man is determined to do something, anything with Dick Tracy, and after many false promises of a sequel or some kind of follow-up, things have seemingly started to lapse for him. But Beatty's hardened nature means he's gone to some interesting places to try and hold on to the Tracy estate. One of these was a little thing called the Dick Tracy Special. It doesn't sound like much of anything, but when you dig a little deeper, things as it turns out are actually kind of, bizarro. Boy, I remember the first time I discovered the Dick Tracy Special. I thought it was some sort of weird special feature, but apparently aired randomly on TCM in the wee late hours, and then never aired again. As it turns out, one man's mediocre half an hour is another rich man's desperate clinch efforts. So now that we've gotten that way too long for its own good little intro out of the way, what about the special itself? Well, it's free right here on YouTube, so might as well give it a watch and see how it goes. Wish me the best of luck. Alright, Warren Beatty's driving to the studio. We're off to a great start. I think this is supposed to be a classic Dick Tracy car. I see what you're doing there.
Tracy! Mr. Tracy, hi! My name is Bernice. We are honored to have you with us.
I'm honored to be here, Bernice.
I know this is supposed to be a famous person, but that is some fervent behavior. Dick Tracy then heads off for an interview with Leonard Maltin.
Well, I'm not trying to flatter you, but you don't need any. You look just wonderful.
Pomegranates.
Pomegranates.
Pomegranates. Pretty good for my age, huh?
Well, apparently Dick Tracy has found out about the secret of eternal life. All you gotta do is pomegranate this, pomegranate that, pomegranate them. Does that apply to other fruits, though? Hey, you know what? For what was something that was shot in a few days, this actually looks pretty good. I wonder who did the cinematography on this thing. Huh. Oh! No, Sir Warren, you don't slip up at all, do you? Even when it involves an irrelevant TCM special that was only made so you could hold on to the full use of the yellow hat and jacket. The story of how Beatty got Lubinski to shoot this involves him and Warren having lunch together. But still, I think Beatty would have asked one of the big ones to shoot this irregardless. That's what power will do to a man. Considering this is a big money-grabbing rights special, this is actually a lot better than it has any right to be. It's basically Leonard Maltin interviewing Warren Beatty in hat and clothes, as they cut between a short retrospective of Dick Tracy as presented by Maltin. As somebody who's a fan of these sorts of, here's a story of how blank blank came to be, and remembers enjoying Maltin retrospectives on classic DVD features, I thought it was pretty enjoyable, if very standard and typical.
So, right now, we have a singular and unique event to present to you. Giving his first television interview ever, we have with us, in person, the most famous officer of the law in American history. I'm speaking of Detective Emeritus Dick Tracy.
You just gotta love how much Maltin is taking this seriously. This is clearly half a day's work off for him, just so he can hang out with some friends and interview Beatty.
And Warren Beatty?
Beatty was fine. He was no Ralph Byrd, or Morgan Conway for that matter, but I will say that the man, he looks surprisingly like me.
I wonder if there's a direct connection between the two. Nah. This special sort of goes on and on like that. Leonard Maltin asks Dick Tracy a question, they cut the clips from other Tracy things, Tracy makes some comments, kind of pokes fun at the Dick Tracy movie, etc., etc. It's sort of predictable in a way, but pretty enjoyable overall, especially if you're a fan of those mini-documentaries on YouTube. Beatty is clearly unprepared, and the entire thing is a feeling of being shot in one take, as he mutters and mumbles his entire words, confused as to why he's there in the first place. But I do think it adds to the special's unique nature. It's a cheap ploy to keep the rights, but it's not dull, and they at least try to wrap it around an actual plotline. I will say it's rather bizarre how everybody seems to be treating this whole ordeal, as if the actual Dick Tracy was in the studio. Like, imagine somebody making an entire media franchise out of a real person. Yeah, it's technically happened, but for example, what if Arnold had a comic strip and other actors playing him multiple times in TV shows and B-style movies? Wouldn't that just seem a bit strange? Maybe I'm overthinking it. Dan overthinking something? That's not possible. This special isn't bad, and I would recommend it to anyone as a neat, weird little object. But did you think that was it? This special was about over a decade ago, and Beatty still has to keep the rights up. So that's not even the end of our Dick Tracy journey. About a few months ago, out of nowhere, alongside a showing of old Dick Tracy movies, TCM randomly had another Dick Tracy special listed on their schedule, simply titled Dick Tracy Special, Tracy Zooms In. Getting very strange flashbacks here. Where have I seen that title before? Well, I kind of enjoyed the first special, so let's see how this one goes. Okay, I think this is a bit of a step down in quality. Have I already made a terrible mistake? Emmanuel Lubinski is back once again to do the cinematography, but I'm not really sure if cinematography is needed aside from the opening, because nearly the entire thing has the feel of being shot in someone's parking lot. This time, Maltin returns, but now he's joined by TCM regular host, Ben Mank. The special starts out with a rather strangely blunt recap of the first one, as Ben Mank watches the original special and starts calling up Leonard Maltin to get pointers about interviewing Dick Tracy. Then they both rewatch the original special as we get a slightly bizarre brief special within a special moment. Then Tracy calls them both up and asks for an interview with the two men. Yeah, it's exactly what it sounds like.
In a movie?
Yeah, a new movie. Why not?
Why not? Warren Beatty's got the rights, right? Still.
Pardon my Italian, but this is getting kind of cuckoo. Aside from the fact the entire thing was shot on Zoom, the first thing to note about this special is that everyone either looks confused or is just not prepared, by leaps and bounds more than even the first one. It's almost like they're just there to help out Beatty or something. Good company to have.
People spoke highly about the interview we did. They found it to be quite unusual.
This is what we call seven-dimensional chess, folks. Just like the previous special, this is done within the context of Dick Tracy being a real-life person. However, this special gets particularly metaphysical, as Warren Beatty as Dick Tracy goes after Warren Beatty and his film version of Dick Tracy.
Thank you. Did you tell Beatty you were impressed? What did he say?
Well, we don't talk.
Copyright lawyers are on red alert. What was that random shot of Leonard Maltin on the phone all about? This thing actually starts out relatively normal, but then the special takes a really, really unreal and outlandish turn as Dick Tracy starts riffing on his own movie, Mystery Science Theater 3000 style. But the best he can give us is, I don't know, what to even say about this, or 7 guys, 1 punch. This would seem theoretically okay, but Beatty is completely unprepared to riff on his own movie. Not helping matters is the Zoom format, which gets incredibly redundant and boring after a while. Seriously, I wanted to include more shots from the special, but most of the time it's just 3 guys talking in the same format. At least the first special had the decency to use more archival footage and photos in a context that actually matters. Oh, so we're actually going to get a payoff to that random call we got earlier. Special, I suppose I may have underestimated you a bit.
May we put you on hold for a minute?
Hello?
Hello.
Hello?
Are you there, sir?
Huh? What? Well, that's certainly one way to make an intro. Well, that was possibly the worst, maybe oddest introduction transition I've ever seen. Is the editing blur supposed to be intentional or something? Is this their attempt to differentiate Beatty from Tracy?
I have an old friend or acquaintance of yours here.
Oh, really? What? Who?
Oh, so that's how it's gonna be. Okay, we literally have an actor trying to retain the rights to a film property he still owns, and what he does is to shoot another special. But oh no, it's just not any ordinary special. He's literally arguing with himself, complaining about his own movie. But the criticism just keeps circling back to the same 7 guys with 1 punch. Somehow, it's simultaneously both sad and an absolute mad genius move at the same time. It did give us these weird little curios though, so I can't say I disapprove of it. And it ends with Warren Beatty as Dick Tracy basically accepting that Dick Tracy is an incredibly old-fashioned character, and the people of other forms of entertainment nowadays. That's like the Greatest Generation of the Greatest Generation answer possible. I'll admit, you know what? That is some impressive editing for something that was clearly made in like an afternoon. What I just watched for the last half hour was straight up headache-inducing. The first special was a kind, fair overview of the character, while being an obvious ploy so Beatty could retain the rights. But what the second one was just pure madness! Honestly, I might be overall more impressed with it as an actual intense object. Beatty could have done something simple and boring, like another interview, but instead he went out of his way to create a literal storyline for his character and an actual arc for Tracy to follow. What these specials prove, if anything, is the length someone will go to retain the rights to a property, even if nobody actually cares about said property these days. Beatty is one heck of a determined individual. Beatty may be determined, but I'm dead set on ending this video right here. So please remember to comment and like down below. It'll surely help me out, so don't need to hire my own crime-fighting detective to help me against the villainous Socks for a Face. Anyway, bye!